Hi guys. So today I started in, I believe it was First Timothy. I believe. Didn't take long to finish though. The longest part of my New Testament readings today was Revelation, because when they were putting together the New Testament, essentially what they did is they had the Gospels, then Acts through Jude is organized based on the size of book. So they started with the biggest, went to the smallest, which is Jude. Then they tacked on Revelations at the end. One thing I noticed is Peter, whenever he preaches, whenever he talks to anybody, he always brings up the resurrection. You'll notice in Acts, when Peter's teaching, he brings up the resurrection. And even in First Peter, like one of the first 3 or 4 chapters, I think, he brings up the resurrection. And I mean, Peter was the chief apostle, and he essentially was what we'd call now the president of the Quorum of the 12. But it's just interesting that, the other apostles, like a lot of the letters that Paul writes, he's writing to specific people or specific members of the church in different areas. And Peter, no matter who he's talking to, has to bring up, or not has to, but he testifies of the resurrection. I guess that's a good way to put it. He doesn't have to talk about the resurrection. He testifies about the resurrection and that Christ lives. And maybe a part of that is his guilt from denying Christ 3 times. I'm not entirely sure. But it also could be that when Christ, after the resurrection, came to the apostles and told Peter to feed his sheep, that's one of the things that Peter wanted to make sure everybody knew, was that, yes, Jesus had to die, but he lives. And because he lives, we have hope. And then I started in the Book of Mormon again. I got to, I think I'm in 2nd Nephi 25 right now. I think. 25, 26, somewhere there. So I made it through both of the Isaiah sections, both in 1st Nephi when Nephi quotes it, and then in 2nd Nephi when Jacob quotes it. And one of the things that stuck out to me in there was a phrase that said something along the lines of, the righteous will eat of the fruits of their labors. That's probably, I'm not a scriptorian, so it's probably not exactly what it says, but it was something like that, and it got me thinking about something that was talked about, that I learned, I want to say last year or the year before, I don't know. Anyway, about how when Jesus talks about the parable of the sower, and Alma's talking about our tree of, or nourishing faith and belief, and Nephi talks about the tree of life, they're all the same story. It's just different parts in the story, When Christ talks about the sower, he's talking about the importance of where your crops are planted, where your faith is planted. And then Alma talks about how to nourish that faith. And then Nephi and Lehi, in their vision, discover the fruits of that faith. And somewhere in 2nd Nephi, in the Isaiah chapters, it brings up that phrase where the righteous will eat of the fruits of their labors. And that got me thinking about, how could it be that what Isaiah is talking about is that the righteous will eat of the fruits of their tree of life? Possibly. Personally, this isn't. I have no authority to say this. This isn't doctrine or whatever, but I personally believe in the readings that I've had and such that the final ordinance that we partake in order to become like our Father in heaven is to partake of the tree of life. Which tree of life? Our own. That's why, I mean, there are multiple reasons Jesus talked about in parables and talked about the sower, because that's what they understood. They're a very agricultural community. But also, it's important to realize that, I mean, there's a very good reason why Adam and Eve were not to partake of the fruit of the tree of life, right? They hadn't learned everything. They hadn't become everything they could. Now, again, that's my personal opinion. That's not doctrine. You're not going to find that on, the church website or whatever. But again, it's an interesting discussion, I guess. Sorry, I do really want to testify that I know the Book of Mormon is true, and that Joseph couldn't have put it better when he said that it's the most correct book of any book on earth, and that we'll become what God wants us to be as we abide by its precepts. Again, I'm paraphrasing because I don't know exactly what he said, but it's something like that. And also that this listening to the scriptures thing has helped me put things together. Like I was saying the other day, it helps me put things together in context. Like I was thinking about, Nephi kept talking about how Jerusalem has been, the Jerusalem has been taken over. They've been destroyed by Babylon, and some were carried away into Babylon. And that got me thinking about Daniel, because that's when that happens. So I was thinking about that, and then in the beginning of the Book of Mormon, that's when the time it mentions that many prophets are preaching to the people in Jerusalem. That's because Jeremiah is around, so it's around that time period in the Bible. So yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of thoughts. I started in, I think First Timothy ended in 2 Nephi 25. I'm trying to think. I think that was it. I mean, the biggest observation that I saw was that Peter always testifies of the resurrection. So maybe that's something for us to learn, or I don't know.